right? Very few that were here from the beginning and being able to see this whole process. And for those of you, I just think it's good to keep perspective on the journey that's gone through. For those who have joined since then, it might seem like, oh yeah, this program is kind of, it has its routines, its rhythms, its way it's gone. If you had to use one word, those 4 people who are here since 2017, one word to sum up the changes, the difference, what was the word you would use? Consistently. So now expound beyond the one word more. Okay, so consistent. There's been a consistent response. There's been consistent work to help things flow. It's crazy when I think about since that time. We started introducing the Spark program in January of 2018 is when we started doing the schedule like it is roughly now. There's been some adaptations, some changes, adjustments along the way, but it's largely still some of that same things that were introduced in 2018 in slightly different forms of how it's being executed. You think about how many people have come through the system, and the fact that we still have a general routines and rhythms speaks to that consistency, that things can still generally run is pretty impressive. Who else from that time, 2017 till now?
I would say needed. I know a lot of people weren't here, but when we were peers, I mean, we didn't even have like a program or a manual or like. I think people would be shocked if they knew what peers was like before we created it. I think it was like much needed.
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of the structure, everything you talked about, of things changing, all of that, going back to the why, was built around building a program that meets the needs of our neurodiverse students, right? They have a brain that is wired differently, and so how do we, as the caregivers, create the environment, create the routines, create the system, create the treatment to address that difference, right? That is at the core root of why all this kind of manuals and writings and training started. So today we're going to dive into the neurology. To George's point, I think this is one of the most critical challenges facing Spark Academy and the other Spark programs in the next 3 to 5 years. Probably 2 to 4 years, actually. I just saw an email today of somebody who never did ASD 4 years ago, and they just sent an email out about how they have sensory integration now for their ASD clients, right? More and more people are wanting to serve the ASD. They're starting to serve the ASD, and so just saying, well, we're ASD experts because we only serve ASD kids, and it's just kind of stuff we've picked up, isn't going to cut it 2 years from now. We've got to be able to raise the bar of expectation of what do we mean when we say we have an ASD expertise as a program. What are we pointing to? What are we talking about that we can speak in a meaningful way that's going to have a direct impact that's different? And it's not just to be different, it's because we believe that will lead to the best care possible. So today, I think it's a fundamental baseline of things that we have to understand and consistently go back to as a framework over and over and over again. Students will present a bunch of different behaviors, right? The saying is, if you've met one kid on the spectrum, you've met one kid on the spectrum, right? Because there are a lot of unique quirks and uniqueness about these kids. With that being said, the neurology underpinnings are generally working through a lot of the same processes. And so if you're going to a process level and you're able to address these behaviors or these concerns or these what needs to develop from a neurodevelopmental process, you're going to find better success instead of playing behavior whack-a-mole, okay? So that's why we're going to be talking about this today, and the more that you go back to this framework, the more success you'll have. I would challenge you to not use words that are defining but narrow. What I mean by that, right? We had a kid in our early days when TIMP was still in the basement of where the school was, right? That's where our TIMP boys used to live. We had a kid who would steal just about everything. He was just a kid who was notorious for just taking things. To the point of once would crawl up through the little foam ceiling plates, crawled into a little storage area and stole some water bottles just because he was like, wanted these Spark water bottles or Pierce water bottles at the time. It was in the treatment teams at the time, what was the word that was probably talked about this with this kid? He's a thief. What's the clinical term sometimes that people love to throw around? He's a klepto. Look at this kid, just stealing everything. How effective was it trying to get this kid to stop stealing things if we were just thinking of, he's just a klepto, he's just stealing things, right? Not very effective. Taking it to the underpinnings of what was the reason underneath the surface that wasn't being met from a neurological, neurodevelopmental perspective was the only way that we were able to find progress with this kid. So any behavior that you start seeing, I would challenge you to take it back to this very simple framework and run it through that in your treatment teams, in your discussions, in your therapy, in the way you talk to the parents, help them reframe it. A lot of our parents have a hard time because they want to talk about this specific thing and this specific thing and this specific thing, and right from day one, let's tackle this issue, right? How do we then reframe that to the parents to help them understand the neurodevelopmental processes underlying what needs to be done, so then that way they're not disappointed, not because we can't tackle those things, but they're not disappointed thinking that you don't want to tackle those things or you're not putting the focus where it needs to be. So we're going to use the whiteboard. So we're going to be talking about the Neurology 101. Some of you, right, have heard this presentation before. And to George's point, please take a step back and think about it. I'm guaranteed there'll be something different than you heard last time, but also please chime in with questions as we go along. This isn't just me talking the whole time. I want to make sure that we're getting this discussion. If you have a question about something, likely there's at least 2 or 3 other people here that have the same question. So please raise your hand as we go through. So we're going to talk about neurology in general. We're going to simplify the brain. The brain is way more complex than we're going to talk about today. It's much more like a spider web of interconnected nodes and processes than it is like your heart, where they're like, this heart does this, and this valve opens and closes. Like, the brain is much more interconnected. But for the sake of simplicity, we're going to cut the brain in half and talk about 2 different key components. The limbic system, right? When we hear, this should be a review, right? When you've heard the limbic system, what is the limbic system? Okay, fight or flight. There's also another third F there that's inappropriate, but it's fight, flight, and something else. But yes, fight, flight. What else? What? Freeze. That's the other F. There's another F too. That's more inappropriate. Okay. What else? What else? Limbic system. What else do we know about the limbic system? Survival. Okay. Correct, right? It's located, and a lot of the limbic system is interconnected throughout your body, right? There's a lot of if you hear about like the polyvagal nerve and the polyvagal theory, there's a lot of the interconnected components. So it's not just your brain we're talking about, it's a lot of your sensory inputs throughout your body. So correct. What else? This is good.
The feeling brain taking over the thinking brain. It's kind of what the limbic system is doing. It surpasses that active thought process.
Yeah, it's an autonomic processes, right? It's things that you don't think about that happens, right? It's your emotional response. It's just like you generally, right? It's not something that you can just sit there and when something happens, you have to think about getting scared. You just get scared, right? It's because your body will react to that. What else? This is good. Kind of rounding out this discussion.
It's also pretty connected to the hippocampus, which is our memory system. And so what we recognize is memories formed when you're in more of a limbic state have a stronger emotional connection, and oftentimes they don't reflect the fullness of the situation that was there, which can really cause hypersensitivity to things that shouldn't normally elicit that much of a fear response. But since they have a memory coded to that, if they experience that again, it's easier to jump to that scared response.
Very, very good, right? It's connected to that memories, but it's a memory, like you said, heavily laced with emotion, charged with emotion, probably missing a lot of the logical thinking components, right? It's not a memory laced with thought, it's a memory laced with emotion, strong emotion.
That's kind of how it relates to trauma too, like along the same lines, like trauma response. Traumatic things or even things that we typically wouldn't label as traumatic but might have been coded as traumatic.
Correct. Perfect. So this limbic system, like we said, for sake of it largely sits right above that brainstem and is interconnected. as you develop, our brains develop like an onion, the inside out. So this part of the brain is developed from the time of, not fully developed, but it's developed, it's working, it's online from time of birth moving in, right? Because, like you said, this whole system is geared around survival, right? Survival of the individual, survival of the species. Survival is why we have limbic systems. The most simplistic brains, that's why sometimes you hear the limbic system called the reptile brain, right? Because the most simple animals have, if they have a noticeable brain, they have an identifiable limbic system, and it's almost an entire limbic system because it's all about survival. What do I need to survive? So a baby born has a limbic system. What can their limbic system do? How does a limbic system help a child survive? "15 years of working with autistic kids, I'm really good at awkward silences, guys." Okay. So some of that attunement, right? The feeling of the connection, yeah?
The limbic system helps the child know what he needs. They're babies, so they don't know that they're hungry or that they're tired. But the limbic system tells them that they're hungry or they're tired.
Yeah, the limbic system, right, will kick in to get a response from a caregiver. That's what the limbic system needs in that moment, so that's what it does. Some sensation hits the brain, it triggers this emotion, this feeling. The baby's not processing, what do I do with this information? It responds. And so I cry, and then it elicits a caregiver's help. Survival, in order to survive, right, your brain must have some level of safety. A brain, your limbic system, if there is not safety present, your limbic brain isn't thinking like, oh yeah, I'm gonna survive, I'm good, right? It's seeking the safety. In order to be safe, there is always some element of control present. It is impossible to feel safe if there is a lack of control, right? This is a very normal process. Why is it in college, right? I know my apartment or my rooms or whatever was never as clean as around finals times or end of semester times. Why? That's something you can control. You're feeling anxious, you're this and that, you don't know what to do, so you maybe clean a little bit, which for me was rare, right? No, a house full of guys, we didn't clean very much, but we did clean sometimes at finals. What else? Think about other areas of life, right? When you think about why people do what they do, why is it that eating disorders have a heavy link, right, to this need of control? Because they're trying to grasp. They're feeling out of control in other areas of their lives, and so they're using something that they do have control over to satiate that internal need, that neurodevelopmental need that's present, right? So this is how our limbic systems work. It's constantly firing and picking up. You talked about the amygdala, the hippocampus. There's a bunch of different interconnected components of the brain. The amygdala is, you can think about it as the input. It's taking in all the input and it's assessing threat. It's constantly scanning and taking information, assigning an emotion, because emotions, what is the role that emotions play in the brain? Why do we have emotions? Very simple here. Let's break it down. First principles of why, as a human, why are emotions important?
Drive us to get the things that we need to survive.
That is very well done, right? Emotions elicit action. They drive us to do things in order to get things that we need to survive. The amygdala takes input, so everything, right? So here we're going to flesh out a little bit of the creepy eye, down to a nose, mouth, all these inputs travel through and hit that amygdala before it's ever processed in the prefrontal cortex, your brain, your thinking brain, which is what this is, right? We're going to talk, this is the prefrontal cortex, the PFC. This is the area of your brain that thinks, that processes, that reasons. It rationalizes, explains, and justifies, right? A lot of that's what your brain does constantly. It's taking in the information and doing something about it. This part of the brain is your quick thinking brain. It's an emotion is connected immediately. This is why, right, if you have a specific smell associated with somebody or a situation, sometimes you can have a smell and it elicits an emotion immediately. This is why when you're driving in Provo and you almost get in an accident, which happens anytime you drive in Provo, you have that moment of, panic immediately before you even process, like, oh my gosh, I almost just got in a wreck. Your brain registers and it reacts, and you have that rush of adrenaline hit your body because your amygdala senses that and prepares you for action. So, so we're on the Provo River Trail. It's dusk. You're walking along. You're all alone because you just need some alone time thinking, and you hear the bushes rustle next to you. What's the immediate thought in your brain? What? My mother. What guys think about it? What's that? Not without thinking, right? Like you go to the worst case scenario. You're like, I'm about to get killed. There's a mountain lion there, right? Like that's your first response. Why would our brains do that to us? Why is that the function? Why will the brain go to the umpteenth degree in the initial quick thinking of a simple input? Better safe than sorry, right? It wants to prepare you for survival. It's not thinking. It rustles, it hears that. Guess what? There's years and years and thousands of years of evolutionary development in this brain that has taught us that unknown sounds that you can't see in a bush can kill you. Right? That's something that's been imprinted for thousands of years. You hear that, you immediately get to the worst case scenario, your body drops all the endorphins, the hormones, everything into your body because it's preparing you to act in the moment to fight for your life if you have to. But also what's crazy about our brains is for most people here, I doubt you take off running down this path screaming, right? I bet most of you would not do that in this moment. 1 or 2 steps later, what is the thought in your head? Probably a mouse, right? You downplay, you justify. You're able to explain away that initial feeling, right? Your brain, you intook that sensory component, went to your amygdala. The amygdala warned you, saying something bad's about to happen. It upregulates, sends stimulus, and they call it like the arousal of the brain, right? It arouses the brain here to act. It says, hey, we need to act. Your prefrontal cortex in that split second thinks through it and says, it's probably a mouse. Because it goes through and has all this information, and you kind of justify it and rationalize to yourself. And that thought downregulates your limbic system. It tells the limbic system, we're okay. We're good. It's just a mouse. Oh, then your limbic system's like, oh, great. Awesome. Just a mouse, not a mountain lion, right? This process is constantly happening. Your brain is constantly taking information and putting into a threat, right? Sometimes that's a social threat. As a social being, right? Humans have that sense of survival. It's not just like a physical sense. It's also the social sense, right? Humans really, really, really hate rejection. Humans really, really hate being disliked generally from other humans. That's a human component that we've been wired to as a group species, as a community group. We're not meant to be loners, right? That's not what we're designed for. Our evolution is built to help us find connection with other humans. This is constantly interplaying. Your limbic system always has a strain, right? Right now in this room, you all have some level of limbic strain. You're probably not even aware of it, right? But here is probably the highest level of limbic strain because I'm really close. And as I get closer, her limbic strain goes up and she's like, what is happening? I don't like this, right? She starts to feel extremely uncomfortable. Lizzie in the back of the room has the lowest limbic strain. She has her back to the wall. She can see all of you crazy animals in front of you. She knows nobody's sneaking up behind her. Her limbic system is the most relaxed, right? Janelle's smack dab in the middle of the room. Because of her experience around you all, she doesn't think she's going to be attacked, right? So she's there and she can generally be okay, but in her brain, she has a slightly higher limbic strain than a Lizzie, right? You have to understand this is constantly happening at all times. It's not like your limbic system ever just shuts off. It is a constant autonomic process that's happening. Oddly enough, this is where a lot of cognitive behavioral therapies roots are in, about how our thoughts can influence our emotions, right? That top-down approach of how do we use these thoughts to help us control our emotional content. That's a lot of what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about. This is a constant interplay of up arousal, down arousal, or sometimes those thoughts can cause this to start to get over-triggered, which then kicks back up here, and that's where anxiety largely lives. There's a lot of anxiety, right, as your thoughts start to run away. This process is constantly happening, and it's something that as you develop and you get older, generally, as this area starts to develop, you start seeing less of what we call limbic dominant behaviors. You see a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum in the store, do you even think twice? Does anybody really even be like, what's wrong with that kid, right? Like, no, you're like, it's a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum in a school, or in a store, that's totally appropriate. If you saw a 20-year-old on the floor throwing a tantrum at the supermarket, I guess you'd have some eyebrows raised, being like, what is going on, right? That's an inappropriate behavior, because we would expect that a prefrontal cortex would be developed enough to downregulate a limbic system and not have a limbic meltdown in the middle of a supermarket, right? Just for fun fact, right? When does the typical male brain fully develop? Prefrontal cortex. It's right between, depending on, there's a lot of factors, of like about 24 to about 28 years old. Female prefrontal cortex?
Still waiting for that.
Guesses?
21.
It's right around about 20 to about 23, 24. Why is there a huge difference between that? Yep, the primary hormone, right, of testosterone. What does testosterone do in our brains? Beefs this up, right? Constantly assessing this of like, oh, I'm gonna beat that guy up, right? Like, I mean, it's just this, and so your brain is more developed here, and it has a constant more of a pull here, and your brain is just like any other muscle. The muscle, the synapses, the areas of your brain you use more become stronger. The areas that you don't use, you end up losing, right? That's the neural pruning. If you've seen Inside Out, right? The people going through and pruning things. It would be terrible if your brain never pruned. You would be completely overwhelmed trying to keep track of everything. You would never be able to have priority shifted to the things that you need most priority on. This neural pruning process happens, so if you don't have it, you lose it, right? Those of you who've learned languages, you understand that. When you have a language and you use it a lot, it's there, but then very quickly as you stop using it, you start to lose it because your brain's like, we don't need it anymore, right? So this process of what we use gets stronger. As we get older, about 3, 4 years old is when this prefrontal cortex starts to become more fully online and operating. And the more that we use that, that's how our brain is designed to develop, the stronger this gets, which then diminishes the control this area has in our life, right? That's normal 101. That's your brain, that's everybody's brain. There's a process right about here that's a little kind of safety valve. We'll call it, it's the RAS, the reticulation activation system. It's a system that you can kind of think about in the brain of the overheat sensor. Just like in your car, right? It hits a certain bit and then it will shut off or it will protect the car. As your limbic system is kicking up this information saying we're in trouble, it starts to fill up. If the prefrontal cortex is unable to downregulate, it will hit a certain point and your brain functioning will shift priority to this, right? This is why when you get really mad, when I mean not just like a little mad, but when you really get mad or have a really strong emotion, intense emotion, and you kind of explode or whatever, when you come back and you're trying to, like, usually it's with somebody, like a friendship or a relationship or something, which is unfortunate, right? But you come back to that, what are some of the words you might say to start that apology? I'm so sorry, what? I reacted. I heard what did you say? I wasn't thinking. My emotions got the better of me. I don't know what happened. I wasn't myself, right? We use all these words. What we're really trying to say in nerd speak is, I'm so sorry. My limbic system was over-arousing my prefrontal cortex and the reticulation activation system kicked in and shifted priority, and I'm sorry for my behavior, right? That's what we're trying to say. Because that's a thing that happens, right? And then you talk about memories and stuff. You literally don't really have that, because what does the prefrontal cortex do? It's the executive functions, inhibition, right? Once you lose inhibition, you say things you don't mean or things that you don't really like. It's the emotion of the moment, right? When you lose your inhibition, when you lose your ability to be able to regulate what's coming out of your mouth, you say a bunch of stuff, okay? So this shifts priority. They've done studies with functional MRIs of individuals, and it's so fascinating to see, like, they take somebody who has a fear of spiders or something like that, and they'll put them in this MRI and they'll show them images and slowly start showing more spiders. And you can see the brain shift in a moment, and you can through the functioning of the brain, you see all of a sudden their limbic system start to light up, and the prefrontal cortex doesn't go all the way dark, because like I said, your brain's, it's not that simple, but it does diminish greatly the functioning of this prefrontal cortex, okay? Why, right? So then When our limbic system senses that it's not able to have survival, it starts safety. And this is the language I want to hear more and more and more, right? You'll find more success if you talk about this with the parents, with your treatment teams. What are your students' safety-seeking behaviors? That's how you categorize things. Your brain, you engage in safety-seeking behaviors to gain control of a situation. That is how the limbic system meets its need. And then, once that control is reached, things start to diminish, calm down, then your brain can get back to functioning. With our students, the reason why neurodiversity starts to happen, and there's a lot of research that goes into this, is there's some reason this is overly developed. An amygdala that cannot differentiate between a small threat and a large threat. A limbic system that is too hyper-attuned to inputs. You imagine living a life where you are constantly feeling out of control and that your survival or your safety is at risk. That is the world that our kids have constantly been living with since the time they were born. Since the time they were born. So what's our average age in Spark right now?
16.
About 15 and a half, 16. 15 years of your kids' lives. What muscles have just been working out overtime for 15 years? Right? What has that done to the development of this? Atrophied, right? This is not as sharp. Does that mean our kids aren't smart? No, they're very smart. But what they have is this imbalance. This is overdeveloped. This is underdeveloped. When this needs priority, it gets priority. It can overpower this area, right? It's the typical gym bro conundrum. The chest versus the legs, right? Like they just don't have the ability. So you have to be thinking through when you're working with the kids constantly about this process. This is what's happening at all times. Your kid will start these safety-seeking behaviors. There's a lot of these are nonverbal shifts that happen before a kid, right? And you should, as a caregiver, be hyper-attuned to the nonverbals of your children that you're working with. Does the limbic brain think about words, what it's going to say? No, right? That's why our kids are so generally struggling with emotional identification. That's why it's one of the key skills we start to work on, because they do not understand the emotional context of what's happening. They feel it, but they generally are very, very bad at recognizing it. Our kids with that overdeveloped limbic system don't identify emotions, which then leads to them acting out and not understanding what's happening. So as the caregiver, you are the prefrontal cortex, external for the kid. You have to know your kid. Think about some of the students you work with. What are some of the nonverbal shifts, some of the nonverbal tells that are self-soothing behaviors that they start to engage in as they're trying to calm down their limbic system, right? We call them pacifiers. Pacifiers for a baby, right? Work because it's an emotion that brings comfort. All of our students have pacifying behaviors they start to do. Very, very rarely do our kids go from absolute baseline to complete overwhelm right away. Oftentimes, there's nonverbal shifts before that happens. And us as the caregiver, whoa, this is starting to heat up. How do we start to respond? So what are some of those? What are some of those pacifying behaviors you start to see in your students? Okay, stimming and pacing, right? The pacing is a huge sign, right? That's a huge sign because it's to the point where a kid is thinking, I need to move, right? What limbic system is that? Fight, flight, or freeze, right? They're starting to feel like, I need to move. I need to go. No, you can't sit down. We have to, stay over here. What is that doing to their limbic system? Even more so. Okay, I saw another hand.
I was going to say when Anastasia would rock back and forth for hours.
Okay, rocking, stimming, right?
Yeah. We have kids that will just put their headphones on and try to tune out the world. They're just trying to limit as much stimulation.
One input, right? How do I just have one strong enough input that it drowns out the rest? There's a video online about a nonverbal autistic girl that was, their family had never heard her talk. And then one day she just ran to the computer and started typing to them. Crazy, right? Crazy to all of a sudden be able to wow, my kid can communicate to me. And they asked, why do you roll on the floor? And do stuff. She's like, it feels like there's ants crawling over my body and I need something strong enough, a sensation strong enough to drown out all the rest of that, right? So when you talk about our kids' stimulation, overstimulation, you think about, right, they're trying to figure out some way to soothe that with a strong enough input that can kind of drown out the rest. Okay. Other behaviors, safety-seeking, pacifying behaviors. Correct. Right. Limiting, trying to limit that input again.
We had a student that would start talking politics anytime they started to go limbic. Like just the most aggressive thing they could come up with, they would start throwing it out there to get a reaction.
Okay. So this is one of, I think, in the domain that we work with. This when we talk about the high, I hate this word, but I don't know if there's been a better word. High functioning autism, right? Side of it. What we see the most are kids who typically are very verbal dominant, right? They are verbally very gifted. They go into the space. Why? What function do them saying the most abrasive things do? Okay. Some other hands here. I'm gonna therapist. I know we're gonna go over here first. You have to remember that, guys. Gaining control of the situation. A kid, think about this. A kid starting to feel overwhelmed, feeling stupid in school because they don't understand what's going on around, says something shocking. I'm going to shoot up the school. What is the response of everybody around them once they say that? It's not attention. No, these are not attention seeking. It's not attention. They're not looking for attention. That's what we think of. We see these behaviors. Oh, they just want attention. Oh, they're just trying to deflect from them. Guys, I'm telling you, that's the neurotypical. That's what a neurotypical would do, is to do that. That's not what our kids are doing. Why do they do that? They know what the response, they know that this is going to elicit. They know all of a sudden, in the short term, is that an effective strategy if you don't want to be at school? Very effective. Is it healthy? Absolutely not. That's why there's the paradigm of we're trying to help our kids be healthy and effective. In the short term, a lot of their behaviors are wildly effective because they get out of stuff. They don't have to do stuff. They get to control a lot in their home because of the emotional content. They control the emotional power of the home. Again, it's not long-term effective, but where does long-term thinking happen? Prefrontal cortex. Are our kids primarily living here? No. So when they're here, they seek that control and they're getting that control. And so it's very effective for them. So they get that need met. So what do they go to the next time it comes up? Boom, let's go back to what got that need met last time. Yeah. Correct. This is not, it's an autonomic thing. They're not intentionally. How often does it feel very manipulative by our kids? When you are the caregiver and you start to feel manipulated by your kid, what does that do to your caregiving affect? You get pissed. Let's be real. You get very frustrated because you're like, this manipulative asshole. Like, I'm so frustrated. Like, we're trying to help you. And you get pissed. It's not something they're doing on purpose, guys. I'm telling you. And sometimes, can a teen be on the spectrum and be an ass sometimes? Yes, it's not mutually exclusive. However, can you deem in that moment if this is a manipulation or is this a limbic function? Sometimes if you get to know the kid, you can get better at it. I will tell you, a good rule of thumb is generally err on the side that this is a bid for control. It doesn't change what you do as a caregiver. I'm just going to let you know if it is manipulation or if it is this. It doesn't really change that. You still hold boundaries. You still have expectations. I want to make that very clear. A kid that seeking control has a limbic dominant reaction, safety-seeking behaviors. Does that mean you modify what you're expecting from them? No. Does it mean you interact differently with them? Yes. Right? That's the difference. It's your caregiver. It's about you as the caregiver. The standard doesn't change. You don't shift your standard just because your kid's having an emotional meltdown. If you do that, what are you laying the ground? What are you reinforcing? It was effective again. They did something they didn't want to do. There's something that's causing distress. And you came in and inadvertently reinforced that autonomic process that I'm going to do these behaviors. Somebody else is going to take control and keep me safe. Again, is that a successful strategy for our kids' growth and development? No, absolutely not. I saw some hands. Was there a hand up? Yeah.
When Because if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling upset with a student, if you're feeling manipulated, your limbic system is in hyperdrive. But if you can recognize that it's not necessarily a manipulative behavior, if we can add other intention to it, even if that's not the true intention, it keeps our prefrontal cortex.
Agreed. Agreed. And this is at the root, right? The root of what we do as caregivers is understanding this framework should shift so much of the way we interact with the kids. I worry oftentimes we inadvertently reinforce the behaviors and the processes that got them to treatment in the first place. And we have to be understanding of that. Right? Is our goal compliance? We just want kids to be compliant and we just want to have smooth shifts. No. You have to understand that, guys. That is not the goal. The goal is not to come in and just have it be where we save our kids from distress. That is a short-term strategy that may work while they're with us, but what's going to happen the second they don't have the Spark Academy structures all around them? It will fall apart and there was no gain, right? We have to be mindful. We're playing the long game here. We want these kids to be successful 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the rest of their lives because of the foundational skills they've learned here.
There are a lot of incidents, we had a lot of crazy things happen, and at the end of it, I was like, this is rough. And he's like, Felicia, this is a great shift. Like, yes, everything happened, but at the end of the night, every single child's needs were met, and they were all able to like go to bed and like be safe and like feel loved and feel like cared, and that's like the definition of what a successful shift is. It was a great shift. And I just like has stuck with me so many times. What? That was a lot, but like every single kid's needs were met, and that was
Perfect, perfect. That's why at a leadership intensive, we want to go over these mindsets. If you can understand that and you can relate, who sets the tone for those shifts? You do. You're the leaders. You're there. Who sets the tone in those treatment team meetings? You do. You guys are the leaders. You guys are there setting the tone for treatment. If we keep going back to this and that's why I can't stress enough, the caregiver affect management is 9/10 of the challenge of ASD treatment. If you can maintain your caregiver affect management and not become reactive to the child, that is the epitome of helping things go right, of the step of helping them get to where they need to be. So much of it is not about the kid, it's about us as the caregiver, right? They're engaged in processes that they generally don't have very much control over. And inadvertently, right, you can imagine from the parents, I want to make it very clear, we have very good parents generally, right? Generally for the Spark families, we have some very good parents who care immensely about their kids, who have tried everything, right? Some of these families have more money than God and have thrown more resources at this and have sought out the best help, and they haven't had success until they come here and they start to have success. You have to understand these parents are doing the best they can. Imagine raising a kid that, how do you start to differentiate from a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? You see your kids struggle. These kids have not been invited to birthday parties. Think about how hard that would be as a parent, seeing your child feeling left out constantly. How hard it would be for you knowing your child doesn't have friends. How hard it would be knowing that your child constantly is being put in this position where they feel bullied and feel targeted. So these parents have kind of had to be mama and papa bear in a lot of things. So what we see sometimes of helicopter parents and these over anxious parents, please recognize that they have their limbic responses. They have their issues that they've fought with for 15 years. And then all of a sudden, at a drop of a dime, we're like, trust us. We've got it. Guys, I'm telling you, we're not the first adults I've sat across from them saying, trust us. And what happened in the past when they heard that? It didn't work. It didn't work. And so they're like, there's a lot of hesitancy. So it's on us as our caregiver management to these two words, the two C's, right? Calmly, but confident. Calm doesn't mean you're just soft and weak. Calm and confident is the demeanor we should take as a caregiver. You come in confidently. Hey, it's okay. We understand. This is what we do. This is your child's. Yes, there was an incident. It's okay. We expect this. This is what we work through. Your child's okay. They're loved. We care about them. That can limit that down and help them see that we are in control of the situation. We're okay. You as the shift lead, right? You come in at that, it's a night, people run around, and you can take that moment and say, hey guys, we're okay. We got this. That confidence helps so much with helping your teams behave in a way that sends the message of, guess what? The adults around you are in control. You don't have to, like, it's okay. There is control here. You are saved. You'll be okay. That's the message we're trying to send. It is crazy how much easier it is to learn social skills, to learn executive functions, to do better in school when you're not constantly in an overwhelmed state. When a kid does become limbic dominant, what can you do as a staff? Or as a therapist or as an employee? What can you do? Okay, co-regulate. How? That's a good therapy jargon, but how do you actually do that?
One of the first things is like, right, what can we control is ourselves. Like, how are we reacting? How are we feeling?
Okay.
Have that effect. The message that your behaviors you're feeling are not too big for me. I can meet you here.
Yep. So we come with that attitude.
Work on coping skills. Model off we can do right that baseline process and then that want to exert all of our energy on all of the things that we've learned.
Yeah. It's the skill of co-regulation without words. Do your best not to throw more fuel on the fire. They are already in a limbic dominant space. You talk to them, where's that input going? Into their ear, up to their amygdala that's already overwhelmed. And is it being processed? Are they thinking about it? No, right? It's co-regulation without words. If you do say words, it's simple reinforcements of love and safety. You're okay. I'm here. I'll talk when you're ready to talk. Pause. You have to understand that it's the co-regulation without words, your body position, your language. Also, if a student, right, does get to a point where they're becoming aggressive or with others or with themselves, quickly intervening and showing to the rest of the home too, you're safe, we got it. Because it's not just the kid that's being dysregulated you have to think about. You have a whole home of other kids. Do you think they're picking up? Am I safe? Yes, guess what? They all have an overly developed limbic system too. If they start to sense that the coaches are hesitant to deal with this kid, what are their limbic systems going to start doing? They ramp up, and pretty soon now they are starting to they have safety-seeking behaviors that they start to engage in. So as a coach, it's that calm but confident. You come in and you regulate without words, and you deal and help send the message to all the other kids too that you're safe. The adults in your life are able to work with you. This isn't too much. That has to be the message we're sent. Do not waste breath and time working with a kid who's in a limbic dominant space. You will burn yourself out, and it's absolutely a waste of time. And inadvertently, what might you be giving the kid? We call them secondary gains, right? You're reinforcing. If you're sitting there and you're like, oh, poor baby, I'm so sorry. Come nestle, let's go, you're okay, right? Then what does the kid just get reinforced? Oh, that actually felt kind of good. Like I felt really loved in that moment. So I'm going to do that again next time. You have to understand, we want them to be healthy and effective in their behaviors. All right. Does this make sense? This is so much of what we're doing. All the other layers of treatment come secondary to this. I think every therapist in the room, right? Once we see our kids start to hit this threshold where they aren't in a constant state of overwhelm, how does therapy go generally from there? All of a sudden you're working with a kid who has their prefrontal cortex and you're like, this is awesome. We can actually have conversations. We can actually talk about stuff. We can actually work through stuff. Parents, we can actually start talking about some of these things because they have the skills to manage talking about some of the things in the past, right? They didn't before. Now they're starting to get those skills. In the home, it's fantastic. These kids can actually do some of their chores. They can actually participate in this. They can follow through. They can engage in the program without as many of these supports along the way to help them get there. It's awesome. It's not going to be quick, guys. We're undoing 15 years of neural development, of them building this process over and over and over again. We're having to rework that. It's not going to happen overnight. Okay. Any other questions about this before we shift gears just slightly? Please, 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 the framework. Safety-seeking behaviors, not stealing or manipulative or lying or whatever the words we start to attach to this. Use this language, please, please, please. It's going to save you and your teams from falling into poor caregiver affect. As soon as your teams lose their caregiver affect, you're lost. It doesn't matter. You could technically do a bunch of good work, technically, but if your caregiver affect window is out, it doesn't matter. It's not gonna resonate, right? Have you ever been in a party with somebody or in a room with somebody that you knew they didn't like you, even though they never said anything to you? Just their energy, their weight, your subtleness, you pick up and you're like, that person doesn't like me, right? Do our kids, can they pick up on that? Absolutely. Can they properly process that and identify the reasons or things? No. They misinterpret, but do our kids not see nonverbals? No, guys, they're hyper-attuned to nonverbals. They misinterpret them all the time. We need to be reinforcing over and over again that we do like them, that we do support them, and we do love and care for them. That has to be the message, right? I was on a trip with some students, right? Kind of like our Spark experiences. This one was at Puerto Penasco, Mexico. So it's just over the border, a little port town. And we were working with some kids and we were picking up some groceries from a grocery store. There was an argument that happened with some peers because they had some money they wanted to spend and they didn't get the snack they wanted and started to get overwhelmed. We get out of the store and this kid books it. And you can imagine, as the caregiver of a teen who's in treatment who just fled in Mexico. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is gonna be a terrible phone call to have to call this parent and be like, your kid is lost in Mexico, right? So I was able to keep eyes on this kid. Luckily, it's a kid we'd worked with a lot. Ran down a little alley in between these stores and sat down in the dirt and just sat there. I calmly approached, gave some space, but I sat down opposite him on the wall, like a couple feet away, so I wasn't in his direct line of view. And we just sat there for probably about 4 minutes, not saying a word. We just sat there. The kid finally said, why do you guys always do this? And I was a little confused. I was like, do what, right? I was thinking he was like mad that I was following him. And I was like, well, what do you mean, right? I just kind of seek some clarification. And he said, no matter what I do, your guys are always there for me. And I just thought, what a win. This is what treatment's about. The relationship approach that we have at Heritage, this is what it's about, guys, is in those moments, do the kids walk away from interactions with you knowing, regardless of what happens, these guys care about me. How many of you were here when we had Emily? Was Emily an easy kid? Emily F. A very challenging student. Guess what? This student is like been reaching out and has been like pleading to come to a Spark Academy program again, whether Homestead here somewhere, because they said out of all the programs, this kid has been to a lot of programs, guys, treatment for a long time. Do you know why they wanted to come back to Spark? It wasn't about the co-ed. It wasn't about because we had the coolest campus or the, as much as Maddie, cover your ears, project-based learning. It wasn't that, right? Why did Emily want to come back? I've never felt as loved and cared for as I was there. That was what they walked away with, guys, is the love that they felt understood and cared for. If that is what we can provide for these kids, then that's our job. We've done what we needed to do. The rest will fall in place. I trust you. Trust me on that. We have to go back to those basics. Shifting gears slightly. Why? It's not just because it's good treatment, but guys, we're talking about the brain, right? The default mode network is just what it says, right? Some of those default, the things, your habits, your routines, the things you build. Your frontal parietal, like the thinking brain stuff. And then you have that salience network that's kind of autonomic functioning. This is the area of the brain that is constantly getting disrupted. Why do they say that ADHD is kind of like autism 0.5? Because ADHD stems from the same thing, the salience network, the inability to shift correctly, right? This is at the root of what we have. Why is this so important at this time of our life? You hear about plasticity of the brain, right? Something you heard about. Pop psychology makes you think that it goes like from here all the way over here. Hate to tell you, that's not true, right? You're not going to have these massive swings. However, plasticity, what happens as you age? It become more rigid. You become more, your brain generally becomes more set into this, your default mode. You start to develop these routines, these things you do, the way you operate, and more of your daily actions and your thoughts and stuff start to default into this default network. You start to lose some of that ability to shift. Right now is such a pivotal time for our kids in their lives. Why is this so important? Right? Some of you have seen this before, but I just think it's important that we understand that's like when we talk about the urgency, intensity, precision, right, that we have as caregivers about why this matters so much right now. Conception to age 3 is a lot of this. There's so many reasons why kids are on the spectrum. Guys, there's so much studies out there. It was like 93 genetic connections of genes that are kind of epigenetically turned on for kids, depending on their setup. Very fascinating fact. 2 non-ASD adults, but if they're in like the hard sciences, such as like a lawyer or a computer technician, are more likely to have an ASD child because of the epigenetic turns on, because of what they spend most of their brain and their genetics that they are turning on, that get passed down. You're more likely to have an ASD kid just from that factor alone, right? Pollution, there are things around it. In Utah, right? If you are pregnant in your second trimester during a year where there's bad inversion, you are more likely to have an ASD kid.
What? Neil, stop telling us this stuff.
Males, right? Males, if you have your children younger, you're less likely to have a kid on the spectrum. There's something about as men age, right? Like your quality of your swimmers get less, and it's kind of an exponential increase from 30 to 40, and then it kind of levels off at this probability at 40. So, advice, have your kids young. But I'm just saying that there's these factors that all play in. There's so many. The weight of the mother. A mother that is overweight has more testosterone in their body and has a higher probability, right? These are all probabilities. It's not a sign thing. The acetaminophen use for pregnancy, heavy acetaminophen use during the second trimester predominantly can lead to autism, right? There's all these factors that are linked in. You're never going to be able to stop all the factors, guys. So don't worry about worrying about it. I mean, limit the ones you can. But there's so many. When does the brain get influenced? Everything is influencing the brain constantly. There's so many things that can start a neurodiverse brain from forming. What we see is this. It all starts to kind of form, right? There's a plasticity, the brain can cope. The brain can only display so much at this age, right? There's only, like back in the day, a lot of our kids would have gotten slapped with childhood schizophrenia, right? In some ways, you can kind of see where that's coming from, right? Sometimes our kids can seem like they're detached from reality a little bit. They have these bizarre perceptions of things that seem to like really not jive with everything else. But they've kind of done some more studies and they realize like, yeah, that's not true. That's not a true thing. It's very, very, very rare to have a childhood schizophrenic, right? But we see these behaviors that are clustered and we put it into this bucket of high functioning autism, neurodivergence, right? There's this bucket of behaviors that we put it into. Guys, this is what adulthood often looks like for our kids. It can blossom back out into many different rabbit holes of behaviors, of challenges in their life. And so much about what potentially could happen here is what happened here. Were they able to make meaningful development in their neurology? Were they able to correct some of these processes and find a healthy way through some of these conflicts so that way they're not constant in a state of constant overwhelm? A brain under immense stress and constant overwhelm into adulthood can turn into a lot of different conditions, right? Not just health, but mental health. Adults on the spectrum, 21 times more likely to develop schizophrenic disorders, okay? 16 times more likely to develop OCD, 12 times more likely to have other psychoses, 6 times more likely to develop bipolar, 6 times more likely to have suicide attempts, 6 times more likely to develop ADHD, 4 times more likely to have dementia, 3 times more likely to develop an anxiety disorder, right? That is the potential future of our kids. So yes, we're working with them here. We're working with them now. We're seeing what they have. The work you do with these kids at the neurological developmental level that we're talking about can have profound impacts for the rest of their life. The work you do may help keep a kid from having a brain that keeps spinning out of control and seeking other ways of dealing with the reality that they live. Think about that, guys. That is profound. When we talk about the sacred mission we have, right, it's deep, right? You have the ability to like legitimately set the kids up and keep them in a vein that is just a neurodivergent. Individuals on the spectrum go on to live very fulfilling lives, right? Individuals with schizophrenia, much harder. Can they? Yeah, they can. The odds are not in their favor, right? And if you start stacking up a lot of comorbidity between these two, then it just becomes harder and harder. My challenge, my urging is to not diminish the role that you have as the caregiver system. Why is it important that we come with that intensity? Why is it that we push ourselves to be the best caregivers possible? Why is it so dang important that we have the best leaders in the industry? Because you set the tone, guys. The caregiving system takes your cues. The more that you're able to maintain your caregiver affect and disseminate that down, the more we've stacked the cards in our kids' favor down the road. And that's what matters. We're not looking for compliance here. We're looking for these kids for the rest of their lives. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for the hard work. It is not easy. It's not easy. But if it were easy, then anybody could do it, right? They would have found a success before now. The challenge that we have before us is really, is our caregiving structure strong enough to provide that control and safety for the kids? That's the fundamental question for every single kid. So I just leave you with that. Thank you so much for what you do. The work you do is important. We're seeing that we go, and I will say as a team, the more we can become expertise, when I say expertise is really embedding this into the way we act, talk, communicate. I hope in 2 years that I hear this language everywhere, that it's something that everybody kind of has the ability to look at this framework, and it's the thing, becomes our default network of thinking. We'll find more success, and that means that we can serve families more effectively. So thanks for what you do. Any questions on this or anything about questions in general for Spark Heritage? I'll open it up to just anything. I think that the concern I have is more the ability to show that they can maintain those skills, right? And it's a little different for each kid. This is why the push for the continuum of care is so dang important. If a kid can manage themselves and operate successfully in the life and launch structures that are here, I believe that gives them a really good kind of barometer of their capabilities and gives them the confidence that, hey, I got this, but also is a good indication of kind of where they're at. That's my one piece. The one other thing that I think still needs to be developed better is the caregivers they're going back to. I do not know if we as a program do as good as we could in regard to our parent work. And that's not a stab. That's not a stab at our clinicians or anything. It's just, I think there's more we can do to help beef that up and make that more successful. Because the caregiving system they're going back to is going to have a profound impact, right? If mom and dad haven't learned this critical skill, like the neurology will potentially go right back to where it was. Yeah, we've been working with Becky to make sure we have a process now that does meet the requirements for what we're doing, and so they can still have that independence for jobs, community. I mean, we had to take a really hard look, guys, at that. I mean, I'm just going to speak frankly, right? Like going through what I went through last year really made me question: is it worth the risk? Because it was traumatic. It was a really hard concept to go through, and is it worth? But when push comes to shove, yes, it is worth it, because I do believe it is such a profound, important act for our kids to gain that independence, to be able to have that ability to have a job and to be able to have some of that and show that with some of the structures we have in place. So yeah, that's being largely resolved, and we're really pushing for those jobs in the community again. Good question. Anything else before? I know I'm keeping you from pizza, which is a dangerous spot to be. But if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm more than happy to have further conversations, or if there's issues or stuff that you want to talk about more or go over language, just reach out. Leslie, if you guys know Leslie, she's the administrative assistant for the executive team and stuff there. She's the best one to just reach out, and she can get you on my calendar. So thanks for all you do.